The cemetery was still warm under my shoes when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "Are you the woman who used to live at 412 Birchwood?" I was standing 6 feet from my husband's grave. The dirt had not yet settled. My mother-in-law had her arm around my shoulders, and her perfume, that white floral one she'd worn since 1989, was making my eyes water in a way I knew was not grief. I typed back, "I still live there." 3 dots appeared. They appeared for a long time. Then a single message came through. It said, "Ma'am, there's a sold sign in your yard and a moving truck just pulled in." Welcome back to Broken Relations. If this is your first time here, we tell stories about families, boundaries, and the quiet moments that change everything. Hit subscribe, drop a comment, and let's get into it. The funeral had been at 10 in the morning. The reception was at the Methodist church annex on Linden Street. I had eaten exactly half of a deviled egg and let 3 people I did not know hug me. By the time my phone buzzed in my black wool coat pocket, it was 1:47 in the afternoon, and I had been a widow for 6 days. His name was Daniel Whitlock. He was 41. He died on a Sunday morning in February of an aneurysm nobody had seen coming, in our kitchen while pouring coffee. The mug shattered on the tile. I heard it from the hallway. I ran. I did CPR for 9 minutes before the paramedics arrived. They told me later it had been instant. They told me later there was nothing I could have done. They told me a lot of things I have since stopped repeating. We had been married for 11 years, no children. We had tried. The house at 412 Birchwood Lane was the first thing we bought together. A 1962 ranch with a brick chimney and a back porch that looked out at a stand of birches Daniel said was the reason he made the offer. He used to sit out there in October with a beer and watch the leaves drop one at a time. He counted them sometimes. I never knew if he was joking. His parents were Roland and Patricia Whitlock. Roland, 71, retired from a regional insurance company where he had been a claims adjuster for 42 years. Patricia, 68, had taught 3rd grade for 3 decades and ran her church's altar guild like a small, efficient kingdom. They lived 20 minutes away in a colonial on a cul-de-sac with a wreath on the door year-round. I had liked them once. I want to be clear about that. The first Thanksgiving Daniel brought me to their house, Patricia gave me a pumpkin pie to take home. She wrote the recipe on an index card and tucked it into the foil. I kept that card in my recipe box for 11 years. I still have it, though I have not opened the box since. Daniel had a brother, Kevin, 2 years younger, divorced, 2 kids he saw on alternating weekends. Kevin sold cars at a dealership 30 miles up the highway and lived in an apartment above the dealership's parts department. Kevin was the family's quiet failure, and Daniel was the family's quiet success. And that arithmetic had organized the Whitlock household for as long as I had known them. When Daniel died, the arithmetic changed. I read the text 3 times. A sold sign in your yard and a moving truck just pulled in? I looked at Patricia. She was speaking softly to Pastor Hughes by the coffee urn. Her hand was on his sleeve. She was nodding the way she nodded when she wanted something to look like agreement. Roland was across the room with Kevin. Kevin was eating a cookie. Roland was checking his watch. I excused myself to the bathroom. I locked the door. I called the number back. A woman picked up on the second ring. Her voice was older, careful, the voice of someone who had been trying to decide whether to call all morning. She said, "My name is Eileen Marsh. I live across the street from you. I've lived there for 31 years. I said, "I know who you are, Mrs. Marsh." She said, "I'm sorry to be calling you on today of all days. I drove past my own house twice before I made myself dial. There's a sign in your yard. It says sold. There's a man and 2 boys carrying boxes out your front door and putting them on the curb. I asked him what he was doing. He said the new owners had hired them to clear the place out before they moved in tomorrow. I told him I didn't think that was right. He said he was just doing his job." I sat down on the edge of the bathtub. The bathroom was the kind of small church bathroom with a single light and a faded print of the Last Supper above the towel rack. I said, "Mrs. Marsh, I did not sell my house." She said, "I know, dear. That's why I called." 6 days. That was all it had been. 6 days since the mug shattered on the tile. And in those 6 days, somebody had listed my house, accepted an offer, signed a deed, and hired a moving company to put my life on the curb. Let me back up. I need to tell you about the morning Daniel died, and I need to tell you about the 4 hours after, because everything that happened later started in those 4 hours, and I did not understand it until much, much later. Daniel died at 8:14 in the morning. The paramedics arrived at 8:23. They tried for 16 minutes. They called it at 8:39. By 9:15, 2 officers were in my living room asking me gentle questions. By 10 o'clock, Patricia and Roland were in my kitchen. Patricia was making coffee. Roland was on the phone. I want to say that again. By 10 o'clock, Roland was on the phone. He was sitting at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad in front of him, and he was making calls. I assumed he was calling family. I assumed he was calling the funeral home. I sat on my couch in the sweater Daniel had bought me for Christmas, and I let his mother stroke my hair. And I did not pay attention to who Roland was calling, because I was 38 years old and my husband had just died on the kitchen floor. The first call I learned about later was to a man named Arthur Penn. Arthur Penn was the Whitlock family attorney, semi-retired, a friend of Roland's from the Rotary Club. The second call was to a real estate agent named Brenda Cole, who had sold Roland and Patricia their cul-de-sac colonial in 1986. The third call, which I would not learn about for another 9 days, was to a moving company in the next county. Patricia made me a sandwich. I did not eat it. Roland brought me a glass of water. He sat across from me on the ottoman, and he took my hand and he said, "Hannah, I want you to know that we are going to take care of everything. You don't have to think about anything. You just rest. We have it all under control." I remember nodding. I remember thinking that was a kind thing for him to say. I want to pause here for a second. If you have ever been in shock, if you have ever lost someone so suddenly that the next 4 hours of your life were a smear of voices and rooms, then you know how easy it is to nod at the wrong sentence. You know how easy it is to sign whatever piece of paper a kind voice puts in front of you. If this is hitting close, drop a comment. Tell me. I read them. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Roland had asked me if I knew where Daniel kept his important papers. I told him the safe in the den. I told him the combination. I told him because he was Daniel's father, and because my husband had been dead for less than 6 hours, and because I trusted the man whose hand I was holding. By 4 o'clock, Patricia had asked me to sign a document she described as a temporary executor authorization so that the family could handle funeral arrangements without me having to run around. She said it was just a formality. She said Arthur, that nice attorney from the Rotary Club, had drafted it. She said it would expire in 30 days. I signed it. I did not read it. I did not photograph it. I signed it sitting on my own couch in my own house, wearing my husband's flannel over my shoulders, and I gave it back to Patricia. And Patricia put it in a folder, and the folder went into Roland's briefcase. That was Sunday. By Monday morning, the document I had signed was sitting on Brenda Cole's desk, along with a copy of our deed, which Roland had pulled from the safe in our den. By Monday afternoon, the house had been listed. It was an off-market listing, a pocket sale, the kind real estate agents arrange when they know a buyer who wants in fast and a seller who wants out quiet. The buyer was a developer Brenda had worked with twice before. The price was $42,000 below the home's actual market value. The closing was scheduled for Friday. I knew none of this on Monday. On Monday, I was at the funeral home picking out a casket. I drove from the church reception to my house with my hands at 10 and 2 and the speedometer at exactly the limit. Eileen Marsh stayed on the phone with me the whole way. She told me the moving truck was a small white box truck with no company name on the side. She told me the man directing the boys was wearing a black baseball cap and khaki pants. She told me they had taken out 4 boxes, 2 lamps, and a wingback chair Daniel had bought at an estate sale the week we got engaged. I said, "Mrs. Marsh, can you do something for me?" She said, "Anything, dear." I said, "Can you take a photograph of the truck and the sign with timestamps and send them to my phone?" She said, "I'm already doing it." There are people in your life who you have waved at across a street for 31 years and never said more than 2 sentences to. And then one day, those people pick up a phone and save you. I have thought about Eileen Marsh almost every day since. I turned onto Birchwood Lane at 2:14 in the afternoon. The sign was the first thing I saw. It was red and white, and it said "Sold" across the front in letters the size of my hand. The moving truck was backed into my driveway with its rear hatch open. The 2 boys were carrying my dining room table down the porch steps. I parked across the street in front of Eileen Marsh's house. She was on her porch in a blue cardigan with her phone in one hand and a thermos in the other. She lifted the thermos. I nodded at her. I got out of my car. I walked across the street. I did not run. I walked. The man in the black baseball cap saw me coming. He did not stop directing the boys. He did not stop until I was 3 feet from him. I said, "What are you doing in my house?" He said, "Ma'am, the new owners hired us to clear the property. We were told it was vacant." I said, "I have been at my husband's funeral. The house is not vacant. There is a coat of mine in that closet that you have not yet taken out, and there is a wedding ring on this finger, and there is a deed in a safe in the den that you have not yet found, and there is no version of reality in which my house has been sold in the 6 days since my husband died." He looked at me. He looked at the boys. He looked at his clipboard. He said, "Ma'am, I have a work order signed by the closing agent." I said, "Show it to me." He showed it to me. The work order had Brenda Cole's name on it. The work order had a closing date of the previous Friday. The work order had a signature on the seller's line that said Hannah Whitlock in handwriting that was not mine. I want to tell you what it feels like to look at your own forged signature on a piece of paper that is being used to take your house. It feels like a door you have walked through 1,000 times suddenly opening onto a different room. The hallway is the same. The doorknob is the same, but on the other side, everything has been moved. I said to the man in the baseball cap, "I need you to put my dining room table back on the porch, and I need you and these boys to leave my property. I am calling the police." He said, "Ma'am." I said, "Now." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he turned to the boys. He said, "Stop. Put it down. We're done here." The dining room table went back onto the porch. The boxes came back into the living room. The wingback chair came back inside, and one of the boys apologized to me. And I do not remember what I said to him, because I was already on the phone with the county sheriff's office. The deputy who came was a woman named Nora Estes. She was in her early 40s with a calm face and the kind of careful posture that comes from years of walking into other people's worst days. She listened to me for 15 minutes without interrupting. She looked at the work order. She looked at the photograph of the sign. She looked at the sold sticker that had been slapped over the address numbers next to my front door. She said, "Mrs. Whitlock, I need you to walk me through the last 6 days. Slowly. Every conversation you can remember about paperwork." I told her about Sunday, the temporary executor authorization, the combination to the safe, Roland on the phone at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, Patricia making coffee. Deputy Estes wrote everything down in a small notebook. When I was finished, she looked up at me and she said, "Ma'am, I am not a lawyer and I cannot give you legal advice, but I can tell you that what you are describing is consistent with elder fraud and estate fraud, and you need an attorney before the sun goes down today. Do you have one?" I said, "Daniel had one. I don't remember her name." She said, "Find her tonight. And ma'am, do not call your in-laws. Not yet. Do not warn them. Let me make some calls." I went inside my own house. I shut the door. I locked it. I leaned against it. I slid down to the floor. The wingback chair was 3 feet away. Daniel had carried it through that door with me on a Saturday in May, 12 years ago. He had banged his elbow on the frame. He had said a word he had not said in front of me before. We had laughed for 10 minutes. I sat on the floor of my entryway, and I cried for the first time since the kitchen. If this story is hitting you somewhere it shouldn't, drop a comment. Tell me your name. Tell me you're listening. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. There is more to this story, and I need you here for the rest of it. Daniel's attorney was named Margaret Yoon. I found her business card in the drawer of his nightstand at 7:30 that evening, paper-clipped to a folder labeled Will and Accounts. I sat on the edge of our bed in the lamplight, and I dialed her after-hours number, and I left a voicemail in a voice I almost did not recognize as my own. She called me back at 8:04. She had been at her son's basketball game. She listened to me for 12 minutes. Then she said, "Hannah, I'm going to come to your house tomorrow morning at 9. Don't speak to anyone in his family before then. Don't answer the door for anyone but me. If they call, let it go to voicemail. Save every voicemail. Do you understand?" I said yes. She said, "And Hannah, I want you to know something. Daniel updated his will 4 months ago. He did not tell me why. He just came in and he did it. The house, the accounts, the life insurance, it all goes to you. There is no provision for his parents or his brother. None. Whatever they have told you, whatever they have signed, whatever they have shown you, Daniel's wishes are documented and they are clear. We are going to fix this." I sat there on the bed. I held the phone to my ear long after she had hung up. The lamp light was warm on the wall. Daniel's flannel was still hanging on the closet door where he had left it Saturday night. 4 months ago. He had updated his will 4 months ago. Daniel did not do things on accident. Daniel was a man who counted the leaves falling off the birches. If he had walked into Margaret Yoon's office 4 months ago and changed his will, he had done it because he had seen something. I went into the den. I opened the safe. I had not looked inside since the morning he died. The combination still worked. The papers inside had been moved. I knew this because Daniel kept his papers in a specific order. Passport on top, then the will, then the deed, then the insurance binder, then the small leather notebook he carried with him to every doctor's appointment. The notebook was still there, but it had been slid to the back. The will was missing. The deed was missing. The passport had been moved to the bottom. I took the notebook out. I sat on the den floor. I opened it. The last entry was dated the Wednesday before Daniel died. It said in his precise handwriting, "Roland came by the house today while H was at work. Said he wanted to see the new gutters. Asked about the safe. Asked again about the will. Told him last time that everything is with Margaret. He didn't like that answer. Need to talk to H this weekend." I read it 3 times. He had been planning to talk to me. The Sunday he died was that weekend. He never got to. I sat on the floor of the den and I held the small leather notebook to my chest and I said out loud to the empty room, "I see them. I see them now. I am sorry I did not see them sooner." Margaret Yoon arrived at 9 the next morning. She was 47, Korean American with short black hair and the kind of unhurried voice that made you feel, against all evidence, that everything was already going to be fine. She brought a leather portfolio and 2 cups of coffee from the diner on Route 9. She set the portfolio on my dining room table. She opened it. Inside were 3 documents. The first was Daniel's updated will, dated the previous October. Sole beneficiary, Hannah Whitlock. Spouse, witnessed by Margaret Yoon and a paralegal named Devin Reyes. Notarized. Filed. The second was a memo Daniel had dictated to Margaret at the time of the update. It said, "I am updating my will because I no longer trust my parents to act in my wife's best interest in the event of my death. My father has been pressuring me for 2 years to add him as a co-trustee on our marital assets. I have refused. He has now asked 3 times for the combination to my safe. He has asked twice about the equity in our home. My mother has begun making comments about how houses are too big for one person. I want it on record that any document concerning my estate that was not produced by Margaret Yoon's office should be considered fraudulent. My wishes are clear. The house, the accounts, the life insurance, the entirety of my estate goes to Hannah. Nothing to my parents. Nothing to my brother. Hannah will know what to do. I put my hands over my mouth. Margaret waited. The third document was a letter from Daniel to me, sealed in an envelope, in his handwriting on the front. To Hannah, only if needed. I did not open it then. I have not opened it yet. It is in a safe deposit box at a bank Margaret took me to that afternoon. I will open it on the day I am ready, and that day has not come. Margaret said, Hannah, what your in-laws have done in the last 6 days is criminal. The temporary executor authorization you signed has been altered. I had a forensic document examiner look at the photo Deputy Estes took of the work order yesterday, and I am 95% certain that the signature line and the scope of authority paragraph were modified after you signed. The closing on Friday was conducted using a deed that your father-in-law removed from your safe. Brenda Cole, the real estate agent, accepted a closing without the seller present, which is unusual but not unheard of in pocket sales. Arthur Penn, the attorney they used, notarized documents he should not have notarized. She closed the portfolio. She said, we are going to undo all of it. Every signature, every transfer, every dollar. And then we are going to decide together what we want to do about the people who did it. I said, what are my options? She said, you have 3. 1, civil recovery only. We unwind the sale, recover any funds that have moved, and bill them for damages. 2, civil recovery plus a referral to the State Attorney General for criminal review of Mr. Penn's conduct as an attorney. 3, civil recovery, attorney referral, and a criminal complaint against your in-laws and the real estate agent for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. I said, how long do I have to decide? She said, we need to file the injunction to stop the deed transfer by Monday. Everything else can be decided over the next 2 weeks. I said, I want to talk to Deputy Estes first, and I want to talk to my mother. My mother lived 4 hours away in a town the size of a postage stamp. She was 71, widowed, and she had not liked Roland Whitlock from the first Thanksgiving. She had told me once, sitting on her porch, that Roland reminded her of a man who had cheated her father out of a piece of farmland in 1962. I had told her she was being unfair. I had been wrong about a lot of things. I drove to her house that Saturday. I told her everything in her kitchen over a pot of coffee. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she stood up. She walked to the cabinet where she kept her late husband's pipes. She pulled one out. She did not light it. She just held it. She said, Hannah, you are going to do all 3. I said, Mama, they're old. She said, they are old, and they tried to take your home from you while you were burying your husband. And if you let them keep 1 inch of what they reached for, they will reach for more. Not from you, from the next person they decide is small enough to take from. You owe Daniel 3. You owe yourself 3. And you owe whoever is coming next 3. She put the pipe back. She sat down. She poured me more coffee. She said, now eat. You are too thin. I ate. The injunction was filed on Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, the deed transferred to the developer was frozen. By Tuesday, the developer's attorney had been informed that his client had purchased a property using fraudulent documents and that a full refund plus damages would be expected. The developer was furious. Not at me, at Brenda Cole and Arthur Penn. He had been told the seller was a grieving widow who wanted a quiet, fast sale. He had not been told the seller had not been informed of the sale. Roland called me on Tuesday evening at 7:42. I let it go to voicemail. He said in a voice I had heard 1,000 times across his dinner table, "Hannah, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Pat and I are sick about this. Please call us. We can fix this together as a family." Patricia called at 8:05. Same script, slightly different words. "Honey, we love you so much, and we never wanted any of this. Please don't let lawyers come between us." Kevin called at 9:18. He sounded tired. He said, "Hannah, this is Kevin. I know we don't talk much. I want you to know I had nothing to do with this. Mom called me Sunday and told me about the executor paperwork. I told her it was a bad idea. She didn't listen. I'm sorry. If you want to talk, my number's the same." I saved all 3 voicemails. I sent them to Margaret. I went to bed. I slept for the first time in 9 days. Wednesday morning, Margaret called me. She said, "Hannah, I want you to know something. Arthur Penn has retained his own attorney. He is no longer answering Roland's calls. Brenda Cole has been suspended by her brokerage pending investigation. The Rotary Club friendship just ran into the disciplinary board." I said, "Good." She said, "And one more thing. Deputy Estes called this morning. The state's attorney's office wants to meet with you Friday. They are interested in option 3. I said, "I'll be there." The meeting at the state's attorney's office took 2 hours. The prosecutor was a woman named Imani Calder, mid-50s, navy suit, the same calm precision Margaret had. She walked me through what charges might be brought, how long an investigation would take, what would be asked of me. She said, "Mrs. Whitlock, I want to be honest with you. Cases like this are difficult because the defendants are elderly and sympathetic on paper. A jury sees a 71-year-old man who lost his son, and they want to forgive him. We will need clear documentation, clear timelines, and a clear motive. From what Margaret has shared with me, you have all 3. But I want to make sure you understand that pursuing this means your in-laws will likely be charged with felonies. That is a path you can choose. It is also a path you can choose not to choose." I said, "My husband wrote a memo 4 months before he died saying he no longer trusted his parents. He saw this coming. He wrote it down so that I could prove it. I owe him a verdict." She said, "Then we have work to do." I want to stop here and say something. There is a particular kind of grief that comes from realizing the person you lost was protecting you from things you did not know existed. Daniel had carried that knowledge alone for 2 years. He had not wanted to make me hate his parents. He had hoped, the way decent people always hope, that he was wrong. And when he had finally accepted that he was right, he had walked into Margaret Yoon's office and he had built me a wall, and he had not gotten the chance to tell me where it was. I think about that almost every day. The investigation took 6 months. Forensic document examination confirmed the alteration of the executor authorization. Bank records confirmed that on the Tuesday after Daniel died, Roland had attempted to access our joint accounts using a signature card that he had filled out himself. Brenda Cole's closing file contained a deed that had been removed from my safe and photocopied with a forged seller's signature added. Arthur Penn's notary log had been falsified to indicate that I had been present at a signing I had not attended. Patricia, it turned out, was the architect. Roland had executed. Patricia had planned. The notes Margaret subpoenaed from Brenda Cole's office included a handwritten list in Patricia's handwriting titled Steps to Take After Daniel Passes. The list had been written 6 weeks before he died. 6 weeks before. They had been waiting. I read the list in Margaret's office on a Tuesday in August. I read it 3 times. The first time, my hands shook. The second time, I felt cold. The third time, I felt nothing at all. That is a feeling I had not known existed. It is the feeling of finally seeing a person clearly. It is not anger. It is not grief. It is just sight. Patricia and Roland were charged in October. Felony forgery, felony conspiracy to commit fraud, criminal attempt to convey property by deceit. Arthur Penn was disbarred and charged separately. Brenda Cole lost her real estate license and pled to a misdemeanor in exchange for testimony. Kevin was not charged. He had not been involved. The trial was scheduled for the following spring. Kevin came to my house in late October. He stood on my porch in a barn jacket I recognized as Daniel's. Daniel had given it to him 3 Christmases ago. And he said, "Hannah, I'm not asking you to forgive them. I'm asking if I can sit on the porch with you for 10 minutes. I let him. We sat in the wingback chairs on the back porch. The birches were dropping leaves. Kevin counted 3 of them out loud. He said, "Daniel told me he did that." I said, "He did." Kevin said, "I'm sorry, Hannah. I knew they were like this. I didn't know they were like this." I said, "Neither did I." He said, "I'm filing for full custody of my kids. My ex agreed. I don't want them around my parents while this is going on. And honestly, I don't want them around my parents after either." I said, "Good." He said, "Daniel was the one who used to call me on Tuesdays." I said, "I know. He told me." We sat in silence for a long time. A leaf came down. Kevin counted it. 4. He said I should go. I said, "Kevin, you can come back. Not every Sunday, but sometimes." He said, "Okay." He left. I have seen him 3 times since. He brings his kids. They like the birches. The youngest one, who is 6, has started counting leaves with me. The trial began on a Tuesday in April. Patricia wore a navy dress. Roland wore a gray suit. They had retained a defense attorney from 2 cities over. Their argument was that they had been overwhelmed by grief and had taken inappropriate but well-intentioned steps to manage their late son's affairs. Their argument was that I had signed the executor authorization willingly. Their argument was that the alterations to the document had been made by Arthur Penn without their knowledge. The prosecution had Patricia's handwritten list. The prosecution had Daniel's memo. The prosecution had Eileen Marsh, who took the stand in a teal cardigan and described, with timestamps, exactly what she had seen the day of the funeral. The prosecution had Deputy Estes, who walked the jury through the work order. The prosecution had Margaret Yoon, who explained Daniel's will and the 4-month-old memo in language a high school student could follow. I testified on the third day. I wore a gray dress. I did not look at Patricia or Roland. I looked at the jury. I told them about the kitchen floor and the mug, and the 4 hours after, and the document on the couch, and the phone call from Eileen Marsh in the bathroom of the church annex. I told them about Daniel's notebook and the entry about Roland asking, again, about the will. The prosecution rested on Friday. The defense called Patricia first. She cried. She said she had only wanted to help. She said I had agreed to everything. She said the document had been a misunderstanding. The cross-examination took 40 minutes. By the end, she was no longer crying. She was looking at the back wall of the courtroom. The handwritten list with her own handwriting on it sat on the prosecution's table. She had been asked 4 times to identify it. She had identified it 4 times. Roland did not take the stand. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Patricia got 5 years. Roland got 6. They will serve them at minimum security facilities. They will be in their late 70s when they come out. Arthur Penn got 3 years. Brenda Cole got probation. I did not go to the sentencing. Margaret went on my behalf and read a short statement I had written. The statement said in part, I do not hate the people who did this. I see them clearly now, which is different. I want them to spend the years that remain to them understanding that the son they raised loved his wife enough to leave her a wall. That is the verdict I needed. The court's verdict is secondary. I did not stand in the courtroom when they read it. I was at home on the back porch counting leaves. It was October again. The birches were going gold. The civil case settled separately. The developer was made whole. Brenda Cole's brokerage paid damages. Roland and Patricia's house, the colonial on the cul-de-sac with the wreath, was sold to cover their legal fees and the restitution they had been ordered to pay me. The wreath was removed by the new owners on a Tuesday morning. Eileen Marsh told me that. Eileen Marsh tells me a lot of things now. We have lunch on the second Thursday of every month at the diner on Route 9. I did not move. I want to say that clearly. The house at 412 Birchwood Lane is still my house. I painted the front door a deep blue Daniel had picked out in a paint store the week before he died and never gotten around to. I had Eileen Marsh hold one end of the porch rail while I sanded the other. I kept his flannel on the closet door for a year, and then I folded it and I put it in a cedar chest at the foot of the bed. The letter is still in the safe deposit box. I will open it when I am ready. Margaret says that day will come, and I believe her, the way I have come to believe her about most things. I run a small business now. I had been a freelance bookkeeper for years. I have built it into something larger. I work mostly with widows and women going through divorce. I help them organize their finances before things get bad and after things have gotten bad. I do it on a sliding scale. Most of my clients pay what they can. The work pays for itself. I think about Patricia's handwritten list more than I should. Steps to take after Daniel passes. 6 weeks before he died. They had been waiting. They had been planning for the day my husband died, and they had not been planning to comfort me. I have a list now, too. It is taped inside the cabinet door above my coffee maker. It says, 1. The people who love you tell you with paperwork as well as words. 2. 6 days is enough time for a life to be taken if you are not paying attention. 3. You are paying attention now. I count leaves with Kevin's kids on Sundays. The youngest one is 7 now. She has gotten very good at it. She caught one this morning before it touched the ground. She said, "Aunt Hannah, does that one count?" I said, "Sweetheart, it counts more." If this story stayed with you, drop a comment. Tell me about a moment in your life when someone you trusted reached for something that was yours. Tell me what you did. Tell me what you wish you had done. I read everyone. If you know someone who needs this story, a widow, a daughter, anyone who has ever been told to just sign here, share it with them. There are more stories like this on this channel. The link is in the description. Thank you for listening. The leaves are still falling. The house is still standing. And so am I.